So today we are continuing our series on US history, and we left off in we talked about the colonization, then the 7 Years War, and we also talked about the British colonization, the massacre of March, and all that. Now we have our first law, which is the Article of Conservation. Confederation. And there were 13 colonies, which were New Hampshire, Massachusetts Bay, Rhode Island, and Providence Plantation. There's only one. Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North and South Carolina, and Georgia. These 13 colonies were the United States at that time. And they did a revolution because they didn't want that monarchy over them. So they wanted balance of power, and they were running away from monarchy, and they were getting into a very free state. These states, they had no law, no federal law. So they would have their own laws in their own states. And that is very good, but there were a few problems. In 1786, for example, there were the Shays Rebellion, which the farmers they had done their work but hadn't been paid, and so they didn't like it, and there's a rebellion. The state could print money and pay the debt, but when these farmers went to another state, their money would be less, with value less than in other state, so that would be pretty bad for them. And seeing that they needed a law for every country, every state, and every state would have their own laws. But there was a pretty high chance of falling into a not monarchy, but a tyranny. So what they did, they made the first draft of a constitution. That's the word, constitution. So they wrote it the first time in 1777. And well, so the Articles of Confederation were in effect from 1781 to 1789. And so we have Daniel Shea. He was a farmer. I've already said it. But now the state could not gather taxes, and they couldn't pay. They couldn't gather taxes because they didn't have a law or a authority for it, and they had no army. Every state had its militia, but there was no army to protect the council if things went bad, or even just to repress the rebellion. And there was no way to raise money. So 12 of the 13 colonies, the only one that didn't go was Rhode Island. They met and did a constitutional convention, and it was called the League of Friendship. And the first constitution, it's the famous one, "We the People," and that is the oldest working constitution. It's got almost 200 years. And yeah, so now the states had limited government, and they only had one vote per colony. And for a law to pass, 9 out of 13 had to say yes. So it was very difficult in that time. And here's a painting of that convention. And we don't see Thomas Jefferson and John Adams because they were as diplomats outside. And so there was the Virginia Plan. So there was a bicameral for the legislative, the lawmaking. It would be bicameral, aka 2 rooms. The lower house and the upper house. The lower house would be directly elected, and the population mattered. So Virginia, for example, had many populations, so it'd have a stronger vote. And Rhode Island had lesser or fewer people, so it would have a lighter vote. And the upper house would be appointed by the lower house. And also the population mattered. But that is not quite the best one because Rhode Island would always be losing. Or for example, Detroit. Maybe Detroit had a better vision than Virginia, but they didn't have as much power. That could be a problem. So the small states, they made another plan, the New Jersey plan, which was, it's a unicameral legislative, and there was only one vote per state. Doesn't matter how big or how small it is. That can seem fair, but it's not, because, well, if you think if the Virginians had a better vision in a point, they would have the same power as someone that is in Rhode Island, for example. And there's way more people in Virginia than in Rhode Island. So it's also not fair. It's like saying that in Rhode Island, people have more power or authority than in Virginia. So out of that, they had a perfect plan, the Great Compromise, or the Connecticut Compromise. There would be a lower and upper house. The lower house is the house of the representatives. Each state had representatives based on population and was directly elected. So Virginia had more representatives than Detroit, for example. And in the appointed one, everyone would have 2 senators per state. So the senators, they are more important, kind of, than the House of Representatives. The Senate is more important than the House of Representatives. That's why it should be 2 senators for everybody. Yeah, I think you get it. And there's 2 other things. So yeah, the U.S. Constitution, it's the shortest constitution, has 7 articles, and it has 4 pages. And it's not meant to be a guide for every single possibility. It's a principle. So it says about the legislative branch, executive branch. It's not in the other nations. They have like thousands and thousands of pages for every possible situation that might happen. Here in the US is only the guidelines. And yeah, it's the oldest constitution in the world. And it's flexible, it depends on the judge. And the last thing is, with the separation of the powers, we have the control and balance. Do I have another one? Yeah. So we have the House of Representatives and Senate. So the Congress is very powerful. It makes the law, it taxes, raises an army, and coins the money. The president enforces the law, he wages war, and he appoints his officials. And the judicial is the Supreme Court, which interprets the law and could be said as the weakest. But if you think the Congress has more power than the president, and the president more power than the Supreme Court, but it's not like that. There is a check and balance system, which is that if a power gets too powerful, we have the other two that can retaliate. So there is no checkmate. So, for example, if the Congress makes a law and the Supreme Court doesn't like it, they make a impeachment. If the Supreme Court makes a law and the Congress doesn't like it, it says it's unconstitutional. If the Supreme Court makes a law and the president doesn't like it, it makes a veto. And if it's the other way around, is an impeachment. And here it's a unconstitutionality. So yeah, so they are checking each other, and no power can have more authority than the others.